What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Naughty33 and this is a complete guide to character building in ESO. I have titled this video a beginner's guide, but for veteran players as well, you can take some tips from this for character builds as well if you want to. But again, this is mainly for beginners and people who are sort of looking to improve their characters. So what I'm going to do is talk you through my 5 main characters, because my last one is still being created. I'm going to do my tank last, mainly because I've covered him in quite a few videos. There's been a few updates to him, but I'm going to do him last because he has been covered quite recently. So we're going to start with a guy I've called Lord Healer. As you can tell by the name, he is a mad healer. So going straight into this, we're going to look at the character and look at his attributes. Now with this guy, I have put 36 points into Magicka and 28 points into health. The health is mainly for when I do veteran dungeons. Yes, I'm a healer, but it's also good to be able to do a little bit of sustain and keep yourself alive, to get the heals out for the players. Like I said, most of these characters are built for PvE. You can take them into PvP if you wish. They are pretty decent, but they are mainly based for veteran dungeons and trials. So like I say, 36 points in Magicka and 28 points in health. It has 29% spell critical. Obviously it's not meant to be doing DPS, this character. The weapon critical is only 19%. The resistances are quite low as well, but again, this is a healer, he's not meant to do damage. So looking into the skills, now the main bar that I use is my healing bar. I do use dual resto staffs. Obviously as a healer, resto staffs are pretty much needed. So going with the first skill, we have Breath of Life. This is my main heal. I'd advise you guys to put this on both bars, so you don't have to keep switching between if you need to get an emergency heal off. But I would also advise not to use this on players or allies that are below sort of 80% health. I'll wait until they're down to about 30 or 40, because this is a really good heal and will take them back to full within no time. So use it as your emergency heal, because it does cost quite a lot of Magicka as well, but use it as your main heal when allies are very low. Going into Repentance, this basically gathers all the souls of people around you, and it heals you and your allies for 3,000 health and restores stamina for each corpse in the area. So it's a good skill to have to get health back and stamina back for you and your allies. Ritual of Retribution. This is a big circle you put down around you, and any enemies inside the circle take damage, and all the time they're taking damage you are gaining health, and that's for you and your allies again as well. So it's an area of effect and does group heals as well as self heals. Going into Healing Springs, this is a resto staff ability, and this summons restoring spirits for you and your allies. It gives you about 4,000 health over a 3-second period. Very good for a quick small heal. And then going into the last one, we have Combat Prayer, and this is basically a long line of sort of a healing carpet, if you like, in front of you, and anybody that's in front of it gets massive heals off it. Going into the ultimate, we have Life Giver, which is the ultimate morph of Panacea, I think it's called. It's the Resto Staff ultimate, and it's a very, very good ultimate. As the Life Giver one, it gives you 3 additional Resto Staff abilities as the ultimate skills. So when you activate it, you automatically cast Regeneration, Blessing of Protection, and Steadfast Ward. So you gain 2 heals, an additional heal, and a damage shield for you and your allies off of this heal. So it's a very, very good morph to have for Panacea. Going into the passives, obviously we have all the passives for Restoring Light, Dawn's Wraith, Ajax Spear. Again, this is going to the second bar in a sec, so I'll explain that. I have all the passives for Destruction Staff and Resto Staff. I used to use a Destruction Staff for this character, but I took it off. So I just use Restoration Staff now. I also use Light Armor with this character, so have all the passives for Light Armor. You don't need to have the annulment skill, just have all the passives. And obviously Fighters Guild, Mages Guild, Thieves Guild, all the rest of it, you can have the passes for that as well, because it will help you out. As a Breton as well, he's a Breton Templar, if you haven't guessed already. So I have all the Breton passives as well. So make sure, once you've got all your skills sorted, make sure to get all the passives as well. Going into the champion points is the most important part, I feel, of any build. Going into the Thief, which is the tower, we have 11 points in Warlord. This is because reducing the cost of Break Free. It's a very good one to have, but I've only got the 11 points in this because it gets the Ensnare passive, which is a very good thing to have. Going into the Lover, we have Tenacity. Now I have this on 100% just out of personal preference, because for every heavy attack you do with your resto staff, destruction staff, whatever, it gets you magicka back incredibly quick. Again, Arcanist, I only have it in this mainly because I'm only using a magicka build, so it's a staff. If I was using a stamina build, I'd put it in Mooncalf. But I'm using staffs, so I've got Arcanist for the magicka recovery. I have 50 points in health, mainly because my health recovery. As a healer, you sort of need to keep yourself on point all the time. You can, if you want, put all those 50 points into Warlord, but out of preference, I put it in healthy. Going into Thief, I only have 9 points in Befoul. And this increases the effectiveness of your healing reduction abilities. And again, I've only got 9 points. You can have 10 to get Fortune Seeker, which you probably could do, to be fair. I could probably take one out of Warlord and whack it into this one just to get the Fortune Seeker passive, but it's not massively needed. Going into the Mage, we have the Apprentice. Now I have 100 points in Blessed. Now that is how effective your heals are going to be to all of your players or allies inside dungeons, trials, etc. So the more points in this, the more effective your heals are going to be. So I've, out of preference, put 100 points. You can, I think it caps at about 75, but I wanted the 100 and just for the 15% extra bonus for the healing. So again, personal preference, but you can mix these about. There's no right or wrong way, but just make sure you have points in these ones. Elfborn increases your critical damage and healing with magicka abilities, and again, as a magicka build that does healing and a damage over time heal, Elfborn is a very good one to have. Elemental Expert is for Flame Frost and Shock magic damage. As a healer, I do have a second bar, which again I'll go into in a second, that has a bit of DPS, so having 50 points into Elemental Expert is good. And again, for Spell Erosion, I'm using a magicka build, and again, I do have DPS and area of effects, so Spell Erosion for that is a very good thing to have. Again, you can probably put about 45 in both of these and put the extra 10 points into Elfborn. But again, out of personal preference, I've got 50 in both. Going into Staff Expert, now you can have lots and lots and lots and lots of points in this, because again, as a staff user, you're going to be doing a lot of heavy attacks and light attacks with your staff, so the more points in that you can have, the better. I'd recommend not going above about 65 because it caps. But again, if you wanted to take the points out of Spell Erosion, you could take these down again. If you wanted to have a lot of points in Staff Expert, you could probably put these down to about 25 each, and then put the 50 points into this, and you'll be sort of well away pretty much. Going into Thermitage, the Ritual, I have Thermitage. This is the effectiveness and damage damage over time effects. Now I have quite a few damage over time effects, so again, the more points in this, the better. Yeah, you're just going to do lots of crazy damage with the area effect abilities with this filled up. Going into the Warrior, we have Steed. I have 47 points in Ironclad, 45 points in Spell Shield, and 46 points in Resistance. They pretty much speak for themselves. Going into the Lady, we have a Light Armor Focus. You don't really need to put many points into Light Armor Focus after the last update. You probably could put those 32 points into either Elemental Defend or Thick Skinned, or upgrade Ironclad to about 65 points. That'd be the best bet to do. We have Hardy, which reduces the damage taken with physical poison and disease damage. Again, good for trials and veteran dungeons. Elemental Defender basically protects you from any flame frost or shock or magic damage sent at you from enemies. And then going into the last one, we have Expert Defender, which is reduce your damage from taken from player light and heavy attacks. Now this is only mainly for PvP, so if you go into PvP areas or you're a PvP player, have as many points in this as you can. Again, I think it caps at about 65. And again, it reduces the amount of damage you take from player light and heavy attacks. And that's pretty much the champion points. So again, if you want to go back and rewind, do feel free to go back through these champion points and see where I've put them, or sort of play with them and see what works best for your character and what your build is, because obviously everybody's build isn't going to be the same as this. Going back into the skills for the second bar. Now again, on the first slot we do have Breath of Life. Again, like I said at the beginning of the video, do have this on both bars because it saves you trying to flick between the bars when you're trying to get an emergency heal off, so have it on both as your emergency heal for both bars. Going into the DPS, we have Channeled Focus. This creates a rune on the floor that you stand inside, and all the time you're stood inside it and your allies are stood inside it, you regain your magicka, and you also take less damage. So it's a very good thing to have. Puncturing Sweeps, I have that mainly for a heal because it's damage over time, and obviously does quite a lot of damage, but it also gives me heals back. So I've got the Puncturing Sweep morph for it. Going into Blazing Spear, which I think is the morph for Oh, I forgot what the skill's called, but you know what I'm on about. You basically throw it into the air, and anybody that's stood inside it, preferably your tank, can get the stamina and magicka back off it from the passive they can grab. And also we have Radiant Glory, which is the big golden beam that you fire at people when they're down on low health. And then going into the ultimate, we have Nova, and that is the big ball of sun that you call into the floor, and people can get the Radiant Oppression, Supernova morph off it when it's called in. Again, you can, if you wanted to, have different heals put onto this bar, because like I said, I use Resto Staffs on both bars, so you could put more heals into this and just be a pure healer, but if you want to get a little bit of damage off, it's good to have 4 attacks that either do damage over time for the Thermitage and the champion points, or just direct damage to the enemy in front of you. So it's always good to have a sort of a mix, but this character is built for healing, and he can heal for days. And then lastly, we go into the gear. Now, like I say, I have 2 Resto Staffs. Both of the Resto Staffs are Jur's Rest. And the 5-piece bonus for that, basically when you do a heavy, charged heavy attack, you create a circle of consecrated ground that heals you and your allies within 5 meters of you for 12,000 health over 10 seconds. So basically, when I hit an enemy with a heavy attack, every 10 seconds I can get a gold circle around that enemy's body, and any ally, including yourself, that stood inside that gold will get health back, incredible amounts of health back. And that's on top of your skills that you can also call in to get more health in as well. So you are going to be healing through the tits on this build pretty much. Going into monster sets, I use Chokethorn on this character. When you use a heal ability, you have 15% chance to summon a Strangler Sapling that heals you or your ally for 23,000 health over 4 seconds, and can occur once every 10 seconds. So it does only heal 1 ally at a time, but it can happen every 10 seconds, and as a healer you're going to be doing a lot of heals, so a lot of Chokethorns are going to procs. Like I say, we have Drurg's Rest, so 5 pieces of Drurg's Rest, and then I also use the Chokethorn, sorry, no I don't. I use the Healer's Habit set, and the Healer's Habit, for 5 items you gain Minor Mending at all times, increasing your healing done by 8%. The first 4 items don't really mean much. Obviously it's increased magicka and magicka recovery and spell damage, but it's mainly for the 5th piece, which is the gain Minor Mending at all times, increasing your healing done by 8%. It's sort of similar to the Sanctuary set, so you probably could run, if you took off the Drug set and ran Sanctuary and Healer's Habit, you would be pretty nuts at healing, especially in PvP as well. Veteran Dungeons, this guy is nails, and Trials, he's been a very good healer in Trials as well. I think that's pretty much all I've got to say for this character, so we'll move on to the next one. So next up we have my next character, which is my Dark Elf Warden. Now this guy is a very interesting guy. He is a multi-role build. Now he can tank and he can heal incredibly well. So we'll go on to the healing bar first. This is what I use him as most of the time, as a healer. So going in, we have Enchanted Growth. This is similar to my Templar build, where we had Breath of Life as the main heal. Enchanted Growth for the Warden is the main heal for this, and he's your emergency heal. So if anybody needs healing, stand next to them and call this in, and they'll get health back straight away. Moving on, we have Budding Seeds, and this is an area of effect heal. So any ally that stood inside a circle that you call in, it's like a big blue circle that goes in, and if they're stood inside it, they regain 6,000 health after 6 seconds. They can also get a synergy, which is Harvest, and they get an additional 6,000 health over 5 seconds. So you can get 12,000 health off of this one heal. And again, it's very good to just keep spamming it and proxing it onto the floor, because then your allies aren't going to die. Again, this character is built for Trials, PvE, Dungeons, Veteran, all the rest of it. He can do those quite well. PvP, he kind of struggles out a little bit. But again, if you're just going to play this in PvE, you're going to be laughing at this character again. So going into Ward Ally, this is a Restoration of Staff skill, and this gives you and your allies a 3,000 point damage shield, and the shield's strength increases by up to 300% depending on the severity of the target's wounds. So if you take a lot of damage, or your ally takes a lot of damage, the shield that you call onto them can do 300% additional depending on how much damage they've taken, to keep them alive longer. Also in the Resto Staff abilities we have Healing Springs. Again, this is the same as the Templar build we just covered, and this is a very good heal to have. It sort of does a very small amount of healing, but it's a big circle again that you can walk inside of, so calling that with Budding Seeds at the same time people aren't going to die, basically. We also have Spiked Bone Shield. Now this is because, like I say, my character is a multi-role player, and he can tank and he can heal extremely well. So Spiked Bone Shield is a shield that I have on my first bar, just to have a bit of protection whilst I'm calling heals in. And then we have Panacea again, which is the multi-restoration staff ability for the ultimate, and it gives you 3 abilities plus an additional heal on top of it. Going into the second bar, we have Gripping Shards. This is an area of effect attack, and it stuns enemies in the area. Like I said, this is my tanking bar, so crowd control is a very good thing to have. Expansive Frost Cloak is a sort of a frost cloak that you wrap around yourself and your allies, and it grants major resolve and major ward, increasing your physical and spell resistance by 5,500 for 24 seconds. Then we have Polar Wind. This is a self-heal, and it also heals nearby allies for 17% of their max health. So it's, again, another little heal you can do. Crystallized Slab is basically 3 giant ice slabs you call around yourself, and if you have like an archer or a sorcerer stood next to you firing shots, the shield absorbs those shots and then fires an ice slab at the enemy and knocks them down, and it does 73,000, protects you from 73,000 damage for more 4 basically. And like I say, each time you absorb a projectile, you restore 578 magicka and launch an icy bolt back at the enemy, dealing 1,772 frost damage. We then have a main taunt. This is Inner Fire, and it is found in the Undaunted skill tree. This is extremely important to have as a tank. You need to get the big bosses onto you. So when you're tanking, you need to call your shields in, call all your heals in if you need to, and crowd control, and then literally just tank the enemies. So Inner Fire is a very good one to have. And I also use Healing Thicket on this character, which is a big area of effect heal. It's basically the big green forest you see people calling around you sometimes in PvP areas. It's a very, very, very good heal to have. And like I say, you can change that out if you want to Permafrost, which is the Warden's ultimate for the frost side of things. And it does crazy damage, but again, I've got Healing Thicket just because I like to keep people alive and myself alive whilst I'm tanking. I have all the passives in Animal Companions, mainly because I used to do DPS with this character, but it wasn't too great, so I probably could take those skills out, so you don't really need to do that. Green Balance is the healing bar, so I have all the passives for that, and I have all the passives for Winter's Embrace. I have all the passives in the Restoration Staff skill tree, again, because I'm using the Resto Staff on one bar. On the second bar, I'm actually using a Frost Staff, and as a Warden, that gets you a damage shield and also taunts the enemy, so make sure you have a Frost Staff equipped as well. And again, I have light armor on this character, so... Oh, and, sorry, I have a mix of light and heavy. So I've got all the heavy passives and all the light passives. I have the passives for Soul Magic and a couple of passives for Undaunted, but they're not particularly important on this character. And then make sure you have your character's passives as well. So I've got Dark Elf skills in this, and all the passives are equipped. But make sure when you're starting a character to get all the skills you need first before you go into the passives, because the passives are pretty pointless until your character is a level you desire, basically. Going into the champion points. Now, again, I have nothing in the tower in the thief tree, so you can skip this completely. You could, if you wanted to, as a tank, have some points in Warlord and some points in Bashing Focused, but it's not necessarily needed with this character because, like I say, you can heal as well. So we have 87 points in Tenacity, 52 points in Arcanist, and 80 points in Mooncalf. The 80 points in Mooncalf are mainly because I don't have any stamina. I don't have any dual wield or anything like that to get stamina back, and Spiked Bone Shield is a stamina ability, and obviously as a tank you're going to be blocking a lot, so you need a lot of points in Mooncalf to get your stamina recovery up. Arcanist, again, I'm using Frost Staff and Resto Staff, so I mainly get my Magicka recovery from Tenacity, hence why I've only got 87 points in this one and not 100 points, because I've mixed them up in this one. Shadow Ward, I have reduced the cost of block by 19%. Again, like I say, I'm going to be blocking a lot as a tank, so reducing the cost of block is massive, especially, as I said, because I need the 80 points in stamina recovery to keep my bone shield in and the block up without using an axe or board and sword abilities to get my stamina back. Shadow Ward is needed massively. Moving into the Mage, we have 100 points in Blessed. Again, because this is a multi-role character and can tank and heal, I've got 100 points in heal because he is a crazy healer as well. 90 points in Healthborn because sorry, Elfborn, even not Healthborn. Like I say, increases your critical and yeah, critical damage and critical healing with Magicka abilities, and this is a pure Magicka build again. So having 90 points in this is very, very beneficial. Staff Expert, in this one I have 43 points. I had 42, but I have one to spend. Like I say, I'm using staffs a hell of a lot with this character, so the 43 points in this to do an extra 23.6% damage with the staffs are needed. Master at Arms, if you're using a warden that has a sword and board, then increase the Master at Arms and take off the Staff Expert. You can switch the points over. But like I say, as a warden tank, I mainly just use Magicka abilities. You can, if you wanted to, go into the sword and board skill tree and have a lot of those abilities on to tank completely differently. But like I say, it's Magicka based, so I've got all my points in Staff Expert. Thermatage for the damage over time. The damage over time only comes from the gripping shards on this character, and I believe the crystallized slab, but I'm not too sure. That's why I've only got 33 points in this and not crazy amounts. Again, if you're going to go crazy with this and have a lot of damage over time effects, you could have like the Fetcher Flies and the Shouks, then you could probably cap this at about 65, but like I say, I've only got one area of effect, so I've put 33 points into Thermatage. Going into the Warrior, the points are very similar to my previous build with the healer, so I've got 47 points in Ironclad, 55 in Spell Shield and 55 Resistant. Again, they are needed, and the main three you need with any build. Going into the Lady, we only have 44 points in Elemental Defender. As a tank, you need to take as little damage as you can from Flame Frost, Shock and Magic damage, so the more points in this, the better. But again, it caps at about 65, so I only put up to about 65 points in this. I wouldn't go higher than that. Going into the the Lord in the Warrior, we have 69 points in Bastion, and this is for my damage shield effectiveness. So the more points in this you have, the better your damage shields are going to be at taking damage and keeping yourself alive longer. As a tank, that's what you're needed for. You're built to take damage, so the more points in this, the better. Again, I would probably cap this at about 75 points. You could go a full 100 if you wanted to, just to be on the safe side, but again, I wouldn't go any higher than 75. And that's the champion points for this character. Going into the attributes, I have all 64 points in the health attribute bar, and again, that is only because when I tank, I'm not really on my healing bar, so I need a lot of health to take all the damage and all the hits, whilst the DPSs and the main healer is sort of helping the group out whilst I'm tanking. If I'm also then healing, I don't really need many points in Magicka because I've got all the points in the champion point tree, and because I'm using two staffs, the Magicka comes back insanely quick with the heavy attacks anyway. So I've put all the points into the health, into the attributes. And I think that is it for this character, so we'll move on to the third. So moving on to the third guy, this guy is a High Elf Sorcerer. Now this guy is built for PvP, PvE and Veteran Dungeons and Trials. So this is an all-rounder DPS, so this is a build you can have a lot of fun with. So moving into the character first, I have 51 points in the Magicka attributes bar and 13 points in the health. Again, because I'm a DPS and he's Magicka based, all my points near enough are in the Magicka attributes and a little bit in health just to keep myself alive. He has 47.4% spell critical and 19% weapon critical, but again, the weapon is because I don't use any sort of two-handed axes or anything like that. I just use staffs with this character, destruction staffs. So it's a very, very good build. Moving in to the inventory, I'm going to do my gear first. So I use 5-piece Mother's Sorrow, and that's for the spell criticals. And I use 2-piece of the Stormfist monster set. And this is when you deal damage, you have a 10% chance to create a Thunder Fist to crush an enemy, dealing 1900 shock every 1 second for 3 seconds, and to all enemies within 4 meters does an 8000 physical damage when the fist closes. So basically it picks up an enemy, crunches them, and when the hand releases, it then does area of effect of 8000 points to any surrounding allies. And then I also use 5 points of Vicious Death, and that is mainly because, like I say, this is a PvP character as well. So having the 5-piece for when you kill a player, they violently explode for 17,800 damage and damages allies all around him within a 4-meter radius. That is again because it's PvP. You can, if you wanted to, use 5-piece Overwhelming, And the fifth piece of that is when you activate a class ability, you have 15% chance to surround yourself within a torrent that deals 2,000 shock damage to the closest enemy within 12 meters every 1 second for 6 seconds. So you have about 10,000 damage off that if you use the overwhelming set. But like I say, I use Vicious Death for PvP and Mother's Sorrow for the PvE side of things with the damage, but it also helps in PvP as well. So that's the gear covered. Going into the skills, again, like I say, this is a PvP guy. So my first bar is a lightning bar. I use Lightning Flood. This is an area of effect. I use Unstable Wall of Frost because I have a Frost Staff for this character on the first bar. And this, again, is an area of effect. So you slam it on the floor in front of you and it's like a carpet of ice that then explodes and does area of effect damage. I use Frost Clench, and this is devastate an enemy with an enhanced charge from your staff, dealing 3,000 frost damage and an additional 5,000 frost damage over 8 seconds, and immobilises targets for 6.5 seconds. So again, great in trials and stuff like that, but mainly even better for PvP because it can stop the enemy in their tracks. Haunting Curse. This curses an enemy with a destructive rune, dealing 7,000 magic damage to a target and 3,000 magic damage to all nearby enemies after 3.5 seconds. The curse will continue to haunt the enemy and explode a second time, dealing 7,000 magic damage to the target and 3,000 magic damage to all nearby enemies for an additional 8.5 seconds. So basically, you can fire this, it will stun an enemy, and then deal damage to them and the people around them, and then it will go off again, stun the same person, and damage enemies around them again whilst they're trying to get heals in. So again, great for PvP. Mage's Wrath. This is cooldown a lightning strike. This mainly kills the person that it lands on, but also does area of effect to the person or people standing next to them. That works on PvP and PvE, so it doesn't matter if they're player controlled or computer controlled. It does area of effect and crazy direct damage as well. I then use Greater Storm Atronach, and this calls in a electric bloke. This is the best way to describe him. It arrives and does 5,000 shock damage and stuns enemies for 3 seconds when it comes in, and then the Atronach zaps the closest enemy for 3,000 shock damage every 1 second, and it lasts 28 seconds. So that's a lot of damage. And an ally can stand near the Atronach and call Charged Lightning Synergy, grant the ally and the Atronach Major Berserk, increasing the damage done by 25% for 8 seconds. Moving on to the second bar, we have, this is mainly a PvP self-sustain bar. So this is Dark Conversion. This is an ability that you bargain with the darkness to restore 8,000 health and 3,600 magicka instantly, and an additional 2,400 magicka over 20 seconds. So if you really need some health and magicka fast, then you call this in basically. It costs stamina, so you need your stamina to call it in, and it gives you health and magicka in return. Streak, you transform yourself into pure electric energy and flash forward, dealing 3,500 shock damage to enemies in your wake and stunning them for 1.5 seconds, and then casting again within 4 seconds costs 50% more magicka. So I'd only use this once, do a lot of attacks, and then after 4 seconds I'll call it in again and get out of there. Then have Rapid Regeneration. I have a Resto Staff with this character for the self-heal. This self-heal is a very good one, again, to have for self-sustaining. So you share your staff's life-giving energy, healing you or up to 2 nearby allies for 12,000 health over 16.5 seconds. So if you need a health burst, or you need sort of like a regenerating health whilst you're fighting, you can call this in, that gives you that much health over 16 seconds. You then have Empowered Ward, which is conjure globes of Daedric enemy for protection. Grant a damage shield for you and your pets that absorbs 6,500 damage for 10 seconds. Damage shield strength is capped at 40% of your maxed health, so it won't protect you for 60% of your health, but it will protect you for the last 40. It also grants Mana Intellect to you and your nearby allies, increasing your magicka recovery for 10% for 10 seconds. So again, that with Streak and Dark Conversion will get your magicka back instantly, pretty much. I then use Ward Ally, which again is a Resto Staff ability, and this is a self-damage shield that I covered on the Templar. And again, it does an additional 300% protection, depending on the severity of your runes. I then use Barrier, which is a PvP ultimate, and it's a very, very good skill to have. And this is basically a shield that you call onto yourself and your allies. It lasts 30 seconds and absorbs 29,000 damage. Obviously, the more levels you get that up, the more effective it's going to be. I have all the passives for the Destruction Staff, Dark Magic, Daedric Summoning, Storm Calling. Uh, I think I said Resto Staff. I also only use Light Armor with this character, so I have all the passives for Light Armor. I have all the Soul Magic passives. I have a couple Mage's Guild, but I don't really use it, so you don't really need to bother with it. I have nothing in the Undaunted, and again, I've only got the one skill in Barrier from the support skill bar. You can have some passives into that, but it mainly only benefits you in PvP than it does in PvE. So if you're going to use this character in trials and dungeons, you don't really need to have the passives for these skills equipped. Also, again, as I'm a high elf, I've got all the passives for the high elf as well. Going into the champion with this character, I have 9 I can spend. Fair enough. Again, we're going to have that about 85. So 85 points in tenacity. This is for the Magicka regen after heavy attacks. Again, you're probably getting sick of me explaining these, but it's needed. So again, more points in tenacity to regain your Magicka and the stamina back from heavy attacks. Arcanist for the Magicka recovery. You don't really need many points in that because your tenacity is going to be working overtime with 2 staffs equipped. 60 points of Mooncalf for the stamina recovery, so I can call in my stamina recovery abilities. 26 points in health recovery, mainly used for PvP, so when you're running away you can get some health back on yourself if there's no healer nearby and your heals aren't doing enough to protect you. I then have 40% in tumbling, and this reduces the cost of roll dodge by 16%. So when you're trying to roll out the way of players or enemies, whatever, it costs you less stamina. So the more points in this, the better. Again, I'd cap it about 65, but this is only really needed for PvP, so you could, if you wanted to, take the 40 points out of this if you're not going to play PvP, and put it into Tenacity, Arcanist, and Mooncalf. Again, Tenacity can go up to 100%, so if you want the points to go to 100, you can, but I would probably split the 80 points between Mooncalf and Arcanist. Going into the Mage, we have the the Apprentice even. We have 100 points in Elemental Expert, and because I'm a shock-based character, 100 points in this is just ridiculous amounts of damage. Again, the same for Spell Penetration. Because I'm electric-based, all my Spell Penetration is going to be nuts. So to have an additional 5,500 pretty much on top of the damage I'm already doing is phenomenal. I then have 18 points in the Staff Expert. Again, this is for the heavy attacks. When I'm trying to get my Magicka back from heavy attacks, it will do more damage to the player. Again, I used to have Sword and Board, or just a two-handed on my second bar with this character, so I had Master of Arms, but you can take the points out of that and put it into Staff Expert, because you ain't going to be using melee weapons with this, you're going to be using staffs. Going into Thermitage, we have 48 points in this, and this is for the damage over time effects again. Again, I'd recommend putting up to about 65, I wouldn't go any higher than this. But this character is good enough for 48, so you probably could split the points again between Staff Expert. Actually, put them all in Staff Expert pretty much. Going into the Warrior, we have 95 points in Ironclad, and this reduces the damage taken from direct damage attacks, and direct damage attacks mainly come from players. So the more points in that, the better. You don't really need it in Spell Shield or Resistant because you're going to be ridiculously powerful anyway with 98 points in Ironclad. Again, it's mainly based around PvP, this build, but you can, if you wanted to, split those 98 points down to about 70 and put the remaining into Spell Shield and Resistant. Going into the Lady, we have 30 points in Hardy, 30 points in Elemental Fender, and 50 points in Thick Skinned. Again, this is damage taken from damage over time effects, so again, cast by players pretty much. Reduced damage taken from physical poison and disease damage, again from players. And reduced damage taken from Flame Frost, Shock and Magic damage, again from players. So having some points in there is pretty good. You probably could take this down to about 40 points and then split the last 10 between these two, make them 35. But again, I wouldn't go above 65 on these skills. And then going into the Warrior, we have 62 points in Bastion, and that's for the damage shields. I don't really say any more than that. That's all that's for. And I think that, like I say, is it for this character. So we'll go on to the next character. So moving on to my very final build, and this is my Khajiit Nightblade. He is a DPS, and again, he is insane at dealing damage, this guy. If there was one character I would recommend for DPSing, this would be the character to go by. So straight away, we're going with the character. I have no points in Magicka because I'm stamina based. I have 42 points in health. And 22 in stamina, but because I'm using dual wield and bow. I don't really need many points in stamina because I can get it back with my champion points, which I'll get into in a second. I have only 18.6 spell critical, but I have 46.1% weapon critical, which does increase with my different monster sets that I equip. If you have Selene's, for example, that can go to 57.2, but at the minute I'm using Ice Heart for the damage shield, and it also does area of effect. So yeah, 46.1 is where it sits. So going into the inventory, I'll do my gear again first. So I have 5 pieces of Vampire's Kiss, and this is for the 5-piece bonus. So when you kill an enemy, you heal for 5,000 health over 6 seconds. Also increases your maximum health, healing taken, and health recovery. I also use 5 pieces of the Defiler, which obviously, because I've got my 2 axes out at the minute, the bow's not equipped, but I have got the 5 piece for this. So the 5 pieces, when you deal critical damage, you have an 8% chance to summon a hunger that spews poison to all enemies in front of you. Dealing 7,000 poison damage and stun an enemy for hit for 5 seconds. This effect can occur once every 5 seconds. So any critical hits, you get a Defiler hunger guy in, and he goes nuts on the characters pretty much. And like I say, I use 2 pieces Ice Heart, and this is mainly for spell critical, but again, I don't really have many spells because it's stamina based, but it's mainly for the damage shield. So when you deal a critical damage, you have 20% chance to gain a damage shield that absorbs 9,000 damage for 6 seconds, and while the damage shield holds, you deal out 876 frost damage to all enemies within 5 meters of you every 1 second, and this effect can occur once every 6 seconds. So every time you're dealing critical damage, again the same as the hunger, you're going to get a damage shield that also does area of effect damage whilst protecting you. And it's a very, very good thing to have. Moving on to the skills, this is where things get very interesting because I love this character. We use Shadowy Disguise, which is cloak yourself in a shadow to become invisible for 2.9 seconds. You increased your next damage within 3 seconds. Your damage your damage done in the next 3 seconds after becoming invisible will be a critical hit. So again, for the critical damage, you'll proc your shield and the hunger. Going into ambush, flash through the shadows and ambush an enemy, dealing 3,000 damage over 2 seconds, and it also stuns them. This is the one where you see people disappear and vanish and then appear in front of them and slash the enemies. Thirdly, we have Blood Craze, and this is a skill that you slice an enemy with both weapons to cause deep lacerations, dealing basically 1,500 physical damage with each weapon, and cause them to bleed for an additional 6,000 physical damage over 9 seconds. And that is a dual wield skill, so you need to go to the dual wield passive skill bar to unlock that. Fourth, we have Surprise Attack, and this is slash an enemy, dealing 5,500 physical damage and afflicting them with major fracture, which reduces their physical resistance by 5.5 for 17.3 seconds. Attacking with a surprise attack while sneaking or invisible stuns the enemy for 4.6 seconds and sets them off balance for 5 seconds. So if you were to call in Shadowy Disguise first and then go straight away with a surprise attack, you will do an additional attack of stunning them for 4.6 seconds, which is amazing to be fair. And then we have Bloodthirst, and this is a heal ability for this build. It is in the dual wield abilities bar. You basically use this close to enemy and you flood an enemy with steel, battering them with 5 consecutive attacks that each deal 706 damage. The final hit deals 300% more damage and heals you for 61% of the damage done. So if you finish off an enemy with this, all the health you take off them you're going to get back for yourself, which is pretty epic. And then for the ultimate for this character, we have Soul Tether. And this ravages nearby enemies' souls with a Night Rune, dealing 7,500 damage and stun them for 4.5 seconds. Ravaged enemies are tethered to you for 8.5 seconds while they remain within 10 meters of you. You siphon 1,200 health from them every 1 second. An ally can target a ravaged enemy and activate the Soul Leech synergy, dealing 6,905 magic damage to them and healing you for the damage caused. So it's a group heal and a self heal all the time you're in a group of enemies. So if you're in like a veteran dungeon, for example, and you've got a lot of ads you need to take control of, you could call this energy in, this ultimate in, deal a lot of damage, stun them all, get all the health off them, and kill them in about 4 seconds. So it's pretty epic. Going on to the second bar, this is my bow bar, and this is also the one that has the Defiler for the 5-piece bonus. So I have Endless Hail, which is a damage over time. Basically, it's a circle you call onto the floor, and you fire a volley of arrows into the sky, and it rains arrows for, I think, 10 seconds. So again, damage over time. Draining Shot is a stun and also a heal. So when you first hit an enemy with this attack, you stun them and knock them back 6 meters for 1.5 seconds, and then after the stun ends, you heal for 5,000 health. So if you again have a group of enemies, you could run into a room, get Draining Shot off on every single one of them, and get 5,000 health off every single one of them, as well as stunning them. Manifestation of Terror. Basically, you conceal 2 sinister traps. One at the target location and one at your feet, so these will actually fear. So if you need to crowd control or you're getting swamped, call this down, and it will fear all the enemies away from you, and it lasts 69 seconds. So the first one, when you call it down, which is the area of effect one, which is the one you'll target onto the floor, that only lasts 1.2 seconds but fears them straight away. But the second one triggers and the fear lasts longer and they disperse like I don't know what. Acid Spray is an area of effect. You basically launch a spray of arrows, I think it's about 6 shots, in front of you, and it launches poison arrows across all the enemies. And it also stuns them as well, if I remember rightly. And then I also have Spiked Bone Shield, just because this character does need a shield to keep himself alive a little bit. Going into the ultimate, we have Rapid Fire, which is the level 50 ultimate for the bow skill tree. And this unleashes a barrage of arrows at an enemy, dealing 33,830 physical damage over 4.1 seconds. And you can also move at full speed and are immune to all disabling effects while channeling this attack. Now, I have used this in veteran dungeons against bosses, and it can do insane damage. So if you were to use it at the beginning and the end of the fight would not last too long. I would not recommend using that on smaller controllable enemies that can die quite quickly, because by the time you fired the 3rd shot of the 6, you're basically missing out on 3 shots because the enemy's already dead. I mean, if you're going against an enemy that's only got 21,000 health and you're dealing 33,800, you're going to waste your ultimate. So I would use it on the bigger bosses. Again, I have all the passives in Assassination, in Shadow and Siphoning. I have all the passives in Dual Wield. I have all the passives near enough in Bow. In fact, there's one I can put on there. And then I've just got the, because I use medium armor with this character, so I have all the passives from medium armor. I used to use a Sigil Order with this character, but you don't have to. It's not really needed. If you did want to use Sigil, you could take it and use it on your bow bar, and maybe use a staff instead, maybe electric staff, a lightning staff, sorry. But like I say, a bow and a dual wield works extremely well for this character, as is a stand blade as well. Don't have any passives in Undaunted, but I do have, again, the Spiked Bone Shield, which is the morph of Bone Wall. And then again, because I'm a Khajiit, I've got all the passives for that as well. And then lastly, we'll go into the champion points. So, this one we have 12 points in Warlord, and this reduces the cost of break free. Again, because you do get snared a few times. I have 90% in Mooncalf, which increases your stamina recovery. As a stamina-based character, you need as many points in this as you can. Again, you don't have to go to 100 points, you can go to 75 because it caps, but I prefer having 90 in it, just out of personal preference. Arcanist is Magical Recovery. I have about 4 magical abilities on this whole build, so having a bit of Magical Recovery is decent, and then Tenacity is all the heavy attacks, what Magicka or Stamina they restore. So in this case it's Stamina because I'm a Stand Blade, so I'll get Stamina regen very, very quickly from heavy attacks. We have 16 points in Befoul, and this increases the effectiveness of your healing and reduction abilities. It's not necessarily needed, but I had 16 points spare and didn't really want to put more into Warlord, so I put some into Befoul. You can put them into Tumbling or Shadow Ward if you wanted to, but out of preference I put them into Befoul. Moving into the Mage, we have no points in the Apprentice. We have 49 points at Master at Arms, and that is for direct damage attacks. So again, dual wield and bow, they're pretty much all direct damage attacks, so the more points in this you have, the better. Again, it caps at about 65, so if you want to go above it you can, if not, don't worry. And then I have 46% in Thermitage, and that is mainly for the arrow damage over time abilities that I've got, and for the monster set Ice Heart shield that I've got as well, because it does ice attacks all the time the shield's proxing. Precise strikes is increase your critical damage and critical healing with stamina abilities. Again, I'm a stamina build, so I need the precise strikes. Increase your physical penetration. Again, I'm using bow and dual wield, so piercing is needed. Again, like you can see here, it caps at about 75. You can go to 100 if you want to, but I wouldn't go above 75. And then mighty increase your physical poison and disease damage, and that is mainly for, again, the bow. Well, especially the bow, because it does physical and poison, because I've got the poison arrow shot. And also for the dual wield for the direct damage attacks. Yeah, moving into the warrior, we have the steed. So we have 58 points in Ironclad and 45 points in Spell Shield. Again, they're self-explanatory. We have 43 points in Hardy, 43 points in Elemental Defender, and 51 points in Thick Skinned. And again, I've done this mainly because you can take this character into PvP, but it also does help you in Veteran Dungeons and Trials. So I would recommend putting maybe not as many points as this. You could put a little bit less in if you wanted to. But out of preference, again, don't go above 65. Yeah, and you'll pretty much be sorted. Going into the last one, we have the Lord. We have 30 points in Bastion, and that is purely for the fact that I have Spiked Bone Shield as one of my shields. And again, for the Ice Heart monster set, that's also a shield. So the effectiveness of the damage they can absorb is an extra 12% for the 30 points. Again, I wouldn't go above 65, but you can go nuts on it if you wanted to. It's out of personal preference really, and how your playstyle is on what monster sets. Again, if I was using Celine's, I wouldn't have the Bastion. I'd take all the points out and spread them between Hardy, Elemental Defender, and Thick Skinned. But again, because I've got Ice Heart, I've put 30 points in Bastion. And I do believe we're down to the last character, so I'm going to go to my tank and explain my tank, and then that'll be it, guys. So thank you for being patient here. Right, so like I say, moving on to my tank. This guy has been covered a lot in videos, hence why I left him until the last spot in this video. So again, we'll go with the character. So again, you can see he's done Maelstrom. He is not built for damage. He's meant for taking damage. That's what tanks are for. So again, 64 points in health in the attributes. Moving in to the skills, we have a shield bar. So this is the main tanking bar that I'll use. So Igneous Shield is a shield that you call on yourself for you and your allies. Lasts 7.2 seconds and absorbs 4,500 damage. Your own damage shield absorbs 150% additional damage. So you gain a stronger damage shield than your allies do, but it's an automatic cast on you and your allies. The only heal that I use is Green Dragon Blood. Enough said, pretty much. Pierce Armor is one of my taunts, and this thrusts your weapon into the enemy in front of you and taunts them onto you for 15 seconds whilst doing 2,500 physical damage. Also afflicts the enemy with major fracture and major breach, reducing their physical resistance and spell resistance by 5,500 for 12 seconds. So basically the whole entire length of this taunt, they're not as susceptible to damage, is what I'm trying to say. I then use one of my shields is Absorb Magic. This is in the board, sword and board bar. This bolsters your defences for 30 seconds and absorbs 28,500 damage from the next spell projectile cast at you and healing you for 16% of your max health. So it's a small heal as well as a big damage shield. Also Bone Surge, which is the morph for Bone Wall. Again, self-explanatory, because as you've seen in previous builds I've used this as well. It's one of my main shields that I do like to use. So I proc them all up and then literally just taunt the enemy and keep them on me. Barrier, again, is a support skill. And this gives you a 17,959 damage shield for you and your allies. So I don't know if I've got it available yet. No, I don't. But what I'll do is I'll literally just call all my shields in, every single one of them, and then when the enemy's in front of me I'll press B to taunt them, and they'll stay on me. I can just literally stay alive as long as I wanted to doing that. For when you're not tanking, so if you're in groups that are pretty easy to kill, you can go with a little bit of DPS here. So I have got Consuming Trap, and this lays claim to enemy souls, dealing 2,900 magic damage to the target and one other nearby enemy for 10 seconds. It also restores and fills up empty soul gems that you might collect. I then use Razor Caltrops, which is the morph for just Caltrops, and this is an area of effects. So you cast it in, it drops a load of mines on the floor, and does area effect as well as reducing enemy movement speed. I then use Burning Talons for crowd control, and this is the claws that you'll see come up through the floor, and allies can get the synergy of Burning Talons and make them implode. So it is very good at controlling the enemies and doing massive damage to them as well. I also use Eruption. Again, it's all area of effect, this character, so all the damage ones I do have is area of effect. So Eruption is a big circle you'll call in, and it's basically hot flames that burn under the enemy's feet. Reduce enemy movement speed by 70% and deals 600 flame damage every 1 second, and it lasts 18 seconds. So having that and the Caltrops down at the same time, the enemy is reduced by movement by 90%, so they ain't going to be able to move fast. You can get in there and then call Burning Talons on and just kill them pretty much outright. I then use Hardened Armour, which is another shield, and this releases your inner dragon to gain major resolve and major ward, increasing your physical resistance and spell resistance by 5,500 for 20 seconds. You gain a damage shield equal to 18% of your max health for 6.9 seconds, and while active, the armour returns 533 magic damage to an enemy that uses a direct damage attack against you. So it's a very, very, very useful shield to have, and it's also the reason why I don't use Bone Shield on both bars. The ultimate for this bar is Ferocious Leap, which is the Dragon Leap morph, and this is where obviously you'll get some wings, jump across the map, land on an enemy, do some damage, and you also gain a damage shield for the Ferocious Leap morph. So the radius is 6.5 meters, the damage shield lasts for 6 seconds, and it absorbs 124% of your max health, which is insane. Moving down again to the passives, so I've got all the passives in Ardent Flame, all the passives in Draconic Power, Earth and Heart, Sword and Shield, a couple of passives in Destruction Staff, because again it is a Destruction Staff I also use on the second bar. You don't need all of them, but I use sort of the main two. And I've also got Heavy Armor passives in this one, because it is a Heavy Armor build. A couple of passives in Soul Magic. So I've also got Werewolf for this character as well, so I've got all the skills and passives for that. I wouldn't recommend using Werewolf in Veteran Dungeons or Trials. I would use them in normal dungeons or group events. I would not use them anywhere else, because if you need to revive someone, you can't whilst you're a werewolf. So I'd be very sensible how you use it. I've got all the passives for Fighters Guild, all the passives for Mages Guild near enough, all the passives for Undaunted, one passive in support for the shield, and I've got all the Argonian skills as well. And I've just realised I can morph Barrier. Shielded allies heal over time, replenishing each time a ward is dissolved, you restore Ultimate and Magicka. See, that's not too bad, but I might go for Reviving Barrier. It's also a revive. The ward also heals you and your allies for 11,900 health over 30 seconds. I think we'll be having that. So yes, Reviving Barrier is my morph for Barrier. Moving into the gear, we have 5 pieces Mark of the Pariah, and that is for the 5-piece bonus. Again, it's because I've not got me staff out to have the 5-piece on this bit at the minute, but it's on the other bar. So increase physical and spell resistance by up to 10,000 based on your missing health. I've also got 5 pieces of the Juggernaut, and this is when you take damage while under 30% health. You heal for 19,600 health, and it can occur once every 1 minute, which is a very useful thing to have if your healer dies and you need some health. And then monster sets are completely up to you with this build. You can go nuts with all the tanking builds. You could use Bloodspawn, you could use well, just anything really. But I personally use Shadow Rends, and this is when you take damage. You have a 15% chance to summon a shadowy Cloudhair for 15 seconds. The Cloudhair's basic attacks deal 3,700 magic damage and apply major maim to an enemy hit for 10 seconds, reducing their damage done by 15%. This effect can occur once every 15 seconds. So all the time you're stood in front of an enemy and you're calling your shields and taking damage, a Cloudhair comes in and will beat the shit out of him. That's what the description should say. And then lastly, moving on to the champion points. This is very important for this build. So again, I've got 27 points in Warlord, which has reduced the cost of break free by 11%. Again, I wouldn't go any higher than 65 because it caps. Moving into the Lover, we have 92 in Tenacity and 85 in Arcanist. The reason why I've not got many in Stamina Recovery is because I'm basically, when I'm on my main tanking bar, I'm using Sword and Board, so my Arcanist from heavy attacks will restore my stamina basically back up. Magicka Recovery is because I don't use my staff that much, so when I do need to use a Magicka Shield, for example, the Magicka Recovery will be intense. Moving on to The Thief in Shadow, we have Shadow Ward, reduce the cost of block by 20%. Again, if you want to, you probably could take out the 8 points of Mooncalf, put these down to about 80 each, and then put the remaining points back into Shadow Ward. So you could make this about 70 points. Again, it caps at 65, but you can go to 100 if you wish. I have 36 points in Blessed, mainly because my Green Dragon Blood and any other self-heal I've got is a bit more effective. It's not mainly for other people, because it doesn't really do any group heals, it's just self-heals. So I've got Elfborn, increase critical damage and critical healing with Magicka, that's for the staff. Elemental Expert, again for the Burning Talons, for the Flame, for everything else, I need that. Spell Erosion, not too important, but you can have a few points in there if you've got something to play with. Physical Weapon Expert is the amount of damage you've done with light and heavy attacks, so again, very much needed. Staff Expert, again, I've got a staff, it's not really needed. You can probably put the points out of both of these and put them into Physical Weapon Expert. That's hence why I've only got 1 point in Master at Arms. Plus stupid putting it in the wrong one. I have 96 points in Thermitage. Now that is because all of my, if I do decide to use my staff bar, all of it, near enough, is damage over time. So the more damage over time I've got, the better. So you could set this to 100. You don't have to go above 75 if you don't want to. But out of preference, I put it on 100. Moving on to the last bar, I have 67 points in Ironclad. 33 points in Hardy, 37 points in Elemental Defender, 33 points in Thick Skinned. Again, self-explanatory, and if you're watching the rest of this video, you understand why I've done that. Moving on to the very last bar, we have 11 points in Expert Defender, and this reduces your damage taken from player and light heavy attacks. This is for PvP. I have taken this character in PvP, and he's very effective, but he's not obviously built for PvP, he's built for Trials, Veteran Dungeons. 10 points in Heavy Armor Focus, mainly because I'm using heavy armor, and it's quite nice to have a bit more resistance. 14% in Quick Recovery is the amount of healing you receive. So the more points you have in that, the more effective the heals by healers and yourself will be as well. And then again, the main one, 65 points in Bastion. If you didn't want to have over 10 points in all of these three here, you probably could collect the points, put all these three on 10, and the remaining points back into Bastion. Again, I've capped it at 65 because that's where it caps, but you can go to 100 if you want to. And I do believe that is it, guys. So thank you very much for being so patient in this video. It's one of my longest ones I've done for ESO, but I think it's very helpful for you guys, especially if you get the game at Christmas, or you've got Games Pass and you're just getting into it, you don't know what you're doing. It's a very basic guide, and I've tried to do it in very decent layman's terms. I didn't go into all the proxies and all the rest of it. So yeah, there's other videos out there that will go more in depth, but this is a basic overlook at all the characters and how to spread the champion points when you reach champion level at 160 or level 50. But yeah, thank you very much for watching this video, guys. If you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe. If you want to join my channel and become a member, you can. There is a link next to the subscribe button. You can just press join and become a patron for the channel. I've been talking so long, my mind's gone to sleep. And yeah, thanks very much, guys. Thanks for watching today, and I'll catch you in the next video.